Is not present, so he has shared he will not be able to attend the meeting this afternoon.
So we have a quorum, and we don't need to decide anything tonight, I don't think anyone. Next, we have the adoption of the agenda. Are there any changes, deletions, or additions to the agenda?
There is a correction on adjournment. At the bottom of the agenda, there is a correction. It should say the quick summary abstract should read adjournment of the study session of the Rowland Unified School District Board of Education. And also, at the request of staff, we are requesting that we pull 2 items from the agenda. We are requesting to pull item 3B, Positive Behavior Intervention and Support Update, and item 3C, Family Resource Center FRC Update.
May I have a motion to adopt the agenda with the aforementioned changes?
Second.
Anybody have any other changes or have any discussion on what's been mentioned? Those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried 4-0. Next, we'll have the flag salute, and our board clerk, Donna Friedman, will lead us in the flag salute tonight.
Right hand over your heart. Ready to begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mrs. Friedman. Next item is public comments. Please note that remarks are limited to 3 minutes unless extended further or limited by vote of the board. A maximum of 20 minutes unless extended by the board is allotted for each subject discussed. Ordinarily, board members will not respond to presentations and no action can be taken. However, the board may give direction to staff following the presentation. It looks like we have...
There are two.
First, Mr. Humphreys.
Roy Humphreys, and thank you for all the good things that you do. The fact that not provide the Bond Oversight Committee with microphones and record their audio session to be posted on the website for the community to enjoy is just the perpetuation of institutional rudeness. I'm calling for the board to provide money for the Bond Oversight Committee to have an independent legal counsel to advise them as needed. Also, requesting money to provide them, the Bond Oversight Committee, with an independent accountant also to advise them. There is more than adequate information that Bond Oversight Committees historically cannot and should not trust those things that come from the district and administrative service, and City of Pasadena's most recent issue on that. Yes, the district promised 2 stories to our community and gave them one, as Mr. Flores noted, a loss of trust. As President Ms. Evankamp noted in the last meeting, so about statements that I'd made previously, I asked for a written request so I could respond appropriately, and have received none to this point in time. As to a point of character, which person or persons who implicated me to the FBI in the white powder envelope received by Superintendent Mitchell, as noted in the Chinese World Journal, read my lips. Okay, the community heroes that were noted at the Chinese Rowland Heights Chinese Association, a key person was missing. That's Harry Peterson, without whom the Bond Oversight Committee would be nothing more than the rubber stamp, as historically noted by Ted Evankamp, PhD. I note that all these sessions can be seen on my YouTube, as for the Bond Oversight Committee and these so forth. And as noted, I've offered to one and all, if you don't like my comments, you take over the video recording, I will be out of here. You'll never hear or see of me again. It's entirely up to you. 54 seconds. The comment about the north side and how they feel, and I appreciate that a lot of people in the district, parents and kids, feel great, especially about Nogales. But guess what? They have been ghettoized for so long just to put a paint job and provide a clean environment is a historical situation and overwhelming for them, especially as compared to what they have now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next we have Shay Lohman.
To go here to the recording?
Please.
Please. Thank you.
No problem. All right, good evening. Educators and parents will always know that our students are much more than a test score. This is only the third year of a complex computer-based test, yet the results show that the gains made in 2016 are being sustained. These scores come as California high school graduation and college eligibility rates are already at record levels, and participation in college readiness exams are surging. But the test scores only tell part of the story. The story of the ongoing transformation of California's public education will be told more accurately through the newly implemented California School Dashboard, which uses multiple measures to provide a fuller picture of progress. When it is fully implemented next year, the California School Dashboard Accountability System will be the first step to providing parents, educators, and students with high-tech resources that they have long been waiting for. As the dashboard continues to roll out through local indicators, it will provide a full measure of student success in school climate by measuring test scores, college readiness, English learner progress, graduation and absentee rates, among other factors. Combined with community involvement in education and a local controlled funding formula, our students can be better prepared for the 21st century, college and career successes that lay ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lohman. Next, we'll move on to reports. And the main basis of tonight's study session is assessment and achievement data. I'll turn this over to Dr. Mitchell.
Perfect. Thank you. And so this afternoon we have Dr. Brian Huff is going to share the CAS for the assessment and SBAC results that we have. And there's a presentation that's at your table and has been available as well to the audience.
Thank you, Dr. Mitchell, President Evan Camp, members of the board, members of the cabinet. We are excited to look at this year's data as it's come in. We've been eagerly waiting for the public release yesterday afternoon it hit, and we've been digging into the preliminary data for a while now, so it was good to have the state results so we can put it in context of where we are. So tonight we're going to walk through that and talk about what we are doing to address the data. Just as a quick reminder, this just shows graphically what is involved in the CASP, the CASP testing system. So at this point, we only get results in English language arts and math. This past year, we began the first year of a 2-year pilot for science, and that will also be given online. So students enroll and participated in that pilot test in May. We'll have one more year of a science pilot test, and then in 2019 we'll get our first results. So we have to wait a while to get results in science. But so tonight we're going to look at our third year of ELA and math data. And also as a reminder, the Smarter Balance system, which measures our ELA and math performance against the Common Core standards, it used to be just one test at the end of the year, and now they give us a lot of tools throughout the year. So in the district we use the interim assessments, but what we're going to look at tonight are the summative assessment results, which are given at the end of the year. Over the summer and early August, we received the student score reports and we mailed those home to parents. Included in that packet was the new score report, which you can see here on the next slide. Now includes for the parents 3 years of data right in a row. And this is also a new feature for the SBAC test. The old test, if you remember, they couldn't compare year to year. But this test now, parents really can see that growth over time as their student takes that test. So we included the student report, a letter from Dr. Mitchell, and then also a parent guide that kind of walked them through how to read the assessment. We've also updated the website that was linked on the letter that includes a short video in English and in Spanish that gives a 3-minute video that gives parents an overview of how to read the report, and some other materials there, some guides that walk parents through that. So let's dive into the English language arts results first. And just as a reminder, this assessment is only given to students who are in grades 3 through 8 and grade 11. In prior years, grade 2 students also took it, and also grade 9 and 10, so now it's a smaller group of students that take it. The first results we'll look at are the overall achievement level descriptors. There are 4 different levels that are reported on the Smarter Balance for ELA and math. 1, 2, 3, and 4. So you can see the stair-step progression. At the very bottom, it's called standard not met, so that's level 1. Level 2 is standard nearly met. And then level 3, standard met, meaning they are at grade level, they're performing at grade level. And then level 4, which is standard exceeded, meaning they are performing above their grade level. So you may have seen the reports in the news the last couple of days. When we look at results across the state, and Shay Lohman referred to this as well, the results, some of the headlines have flatlined across the state. And even among the 12 member states that took the Smarter Balance test, all of the states that took it actually went down. California was the one state that had the smallest decrease. California went from 49% meeting or exceeding. So when we look at these numbers here, these numbers reflect the percentage of students that met or exceed. So when we go back to the stair step, we're looking at the percentage of students that were up standard met or standard exceeded, so levels 3 and 4 combined. So in California, there's 48.56% this year that met or exceeded. You'll also notice that there are now it goes out to the hundredths place in the reporting, so two decimal places. That is new this year. The first 2 years they rounded to the nearest whole number, so that's why it shows 44, 49, and then it goes a long decimal. It's not because I wanted to provide more longer numbers for you, but that is now how they're presenting the data. LA County increased to 47.2, and then in Roland we dipped to just over 2 points, down to 49.83 compared to the prior year. The other point that I want to make that we'll look at throughout the whole night together, well, the next hour, not the whole night, it'll be a long day, is comparing year over year to the 2-year growth. So if you look at, for example, in the state, 2015, 44%, that was the baseline year, met or exceeded. And then you compare that to 2017, 48.56. That's a 4.56 jump from the first year. So in Roland, our baseline year in ELA was 46%. So this most recent test data is 49.83. That still represents a 3.83 point increase from our baseline. So we're going to be looking at both year over year and also the 2-year change. The next slide shows by grade level, and again, this shows the 3-year change by grade level. So if we look at the elementary grades, grade 3, the most recent scores, 45% of our grade 3 students were meeting or exceeding. Grade 4, 44%, grade 5, 47%, and grade 6, 50%. So each of these grade levels in elementary are a decrease from last year. they also represent an increase from the first year. Some of the reasons when we are digging into the data that we we're looking at school by school and across the district. We ran the ELA pilot last year. It was a new curriculum, so that is possibly one factor that affected the decrease. We also are happy to report that there are areas and schools that we noticed that went against that trend. So there were some schools that actually went up in the elementary grade levels in ELA. So as a state, it went down a little bit. As a district, we went down a couple of points, but there are some schools at the elementary level that went up. So we are pulling out those areas and those classrooms and those schools that improved, and looking at the practices and sharing those practices and replicating those across the district. When we look at the secondary, grade 7, 8, and 11, grade 7 maintained at 48, grade 8 increased a point to 50, and then grade 11 dropped down to 64%, which is the highest percentage, among all the grade levels in ELA. So this chart communicates the 2-year change. So if we go back to this chart, and let's take grade 3 for an example. Grade 3, our baseline score in 2015 was 39%, 39% meeting or exceeding. And then we fast forward 2 years to 2017, 45% met or exceeded. So that change is reflected in this chart here. So in grade 3, the percentage change of students who met or exceeded standards in 2015 compared to 2017 was 5.88. So it increased 5.88 points. Grade 4 increased 5.33 points. Grade 5 dropped about half a point, 0.41. Which, by the way, is statewide. That's one of the big challenging grade levels as you progress up the grade levels. Grade 5, the scores tend to drop a little bit. And then grades 6, 7, 8, and 11 also increased over that 2-year period. And overall, you can see that 2-year period we increased 3.83 points. All right, so if we look deeper into the claim level report, so in English language arts, they present not only the overall scores, but also scores in reading, writing, speaking, listening, and research inquiry. So this slide gives just a one slide view of where we've come over the last 2 years with these different scores. And we'll start with reading. Reading is the only claim, is our lowest claim score. The last 2 years we've made that our interim assessment for the districts for all grades. So we believe that's partly because we've been focusing on that. That's part of the reason why we've seen the increase. Now when we look at writing, listening, and research and inquiry, all of those 3 claims did decrease compared to last year. Some of the things we're doing this year, and we'll talk about this at the end as well, there is a writing focus in the professional development, and we'll be going into that more in depth later. But we are also introducing a performance task this year as part of our interim assessments that requires students to do a full write and to do the kinds of tasks they'll have to do at the end of the year on the performance task. All right, so we can go into math now, and for math we have similar results at the state and county went up very slightly. So again, sort of the big message is sort of flatlining in math as well. Roland went up about half a percentage point in the percentage of students that are meeting or exceeding. When we look at...
Sorry, can you go back
Yes.
real quick? We were missing the numbers. Oh, wait, let me check it. Okay.
Oh,
Thank you.
sorry about that. So when you break down the math scores by grade level, and we look at it elementary and in secondary, so our elementary grades in math actually either maintained or all went up. So in ELA they went down slightly, but in math our grades 3, 4, 5, and 6, 3 and 4 maintained, and then grade 5 and 6 increased year over year. And especially when you compare the most recent year of our elementary grades in math compared to the first year, you can see in grade 3 it went from 44 the first year up to 51. So that's a 7-point jump in grade 3. In grade 4 it went from 35 the first year all the way up to 44. So that's a 9-point jump. And then grade 5, 28 to 37. And 35 to 39. I'm going to move ahead one slide and just show you that 2-year jump in grades 3 through 6, which is quite significant increase, a 2-year increase over time. When we look at the secondary, so grades 7, 8, and 11, grade 7 has gone down both years. So the first year in grade 7 was at 42%, 41% 2016, and then in 2017, it was down to 39%. So a decrease of about 3 points over 2 years. In grade 8, decreased 2 points this year to 40 and maintained their baseline of 40. And then grade 11 decreased from 37 down to 34, which is lower than the baseline year. So this is one of the areas that we as a team are really taking a deep look at, is our secondary mathematics, because they if you look at the 2-year trend here, grade 7 has gone down 3.06 points, grade 8 a third of a point, and then grade 11 about down 2 points. They have been in a process of identifying curriculum and readjusting to the math, the new standards, and also been a long journey in shifting instruction, because to perform well on this test is students doing worksheets and doing sort of low-level activities is not going to get the kind of outcomes on this kind of test, because this test requires students to really synthesize information, solve problems, real-life problems, explain their answers, write, do a lot of writing, communicate their reasoning, and that is a much higher level of thinking that requires a different kind of instruction. So there's been a lot of work and thought around how are we shifting our instruction to match the rigor of the math test. So that is an area that we're digging into more, an area that we are focusing on. If we go into the claim areas of math, there are 3 different reporting claim areas: concepts and procedures. And concepts and procedures are what we typically think of about math. So how do you number sense on the early grades, understanding what a fraction is and how to work with fractions, to up into the middle grades and upper grades, algebraic equations and how to use expressions to solve problems. And then the second 2, problem solving and data analysis and communicating reasoning. This is where this test really departs from what we knew before, and it is requiring students to solve problems, synthesize information, make arguments, make claims about what they're doing, cite evidence about how they're reasoning, which is a much higher level of problem solving than we did in the past. So these are the scores over the last 3 years for the different claim areas in math. Concepts and procedures continues to be the lowest performing claim, and that's been a focus of our of our interim assessments. It has improved over the 2 years, so from 57 to 59, but those have been the focus of our interim assessments. You'll notice that the other 2 claims also decreased, so communicating, reasoning 73 to 70, and then problem solving, modeling, data analysis 65 to 64. Again, as I mentioned, those claim areas are the kinds of problems that ask students to solve real-life problems and cite evidence and make arguments for why what they're doing makes sense. We are introducing, just like in ELA, we're introducing performance tasks into the local assessments this year. As part of our interims in February, they'll be doing that in an effort to sort of align what we're doing with what the summative requires. Now we're going to look at these results through the lens of our subgroups. So how did our economically disadvantaged students perform, English learners, foster students, and students with disabilities? So the way that I'm presenting this is just a one-year snapshot. So it'll be a one-year snapshot of how our Roland students did compared to the county and to the state. The first slide shows our economically disadvantaged students. These are students who are on free and reduced lunch. And in Roland, 42% of our economically disadvantaged students met or exceeded an ELA, which is about 4 points higher than the county and 6 points higher than the state. In math, we see similar results compared to the county and state. So students in Roland who come to us from who are economic disadvantaged outperform their peers at the county and also at the state level. Looking at English learners in English language arts, so this is the same test we've been looking at, but just broken down by English learners. If you look at the far right column, this will show you the English learners in Roland who met or exceeded standard in ELA. You have it? Okay. But you don't have the bottom. Okay. We can reprint this for you after. That one. Do we want to grab one of the?
I got it. Keep going.
So on the far right, you see in Roland Roland's in blue. So we have 9% of our English learners meeting or exceeding in ELA compared to the county at 10 and then the state at 12. And a little bit of the story behind this data is that Roland has typically, and this year is no exception, is actually more the case, has reclassified students at a much higher rate than the state and the county. So when we think, can I get up and walk over, or take this with me? Okay.
Yeah, you do.
So what that means is that the students that are in this cohort that are reflected in this data are the students that are still English learners in Roland. So what happens in Roland is that we have, this past year we had a 19% reclassification rate, which is about 4% higher than the state at 15, actually no, it's about 7% higher than the state at 11-12%. They're usually 11-12%. So what that means is that we are moving more students from English learners into this category of reclassified fluent English proficient. So when those kids who are higher performing move into the RFAP, then that leaves a cohort of kids that are lower performing English learners, which is why we see that jump here. What's validating for us is that we have a 19% reclassification rate, But yet still, if you look at the way they're performing against the state and the county, we're still significantly outperforming both the state and the county. So, and that has been a trend in Roland for many, many years, where our students that are reclassified outperform even the fluent English and English only. So students, and we know this from research, that students who speak more than one language typically outperform EO kids on standardized testing. So it's, I think, a tribute to the instruction, to the EL instruction, and moving students out into having access to mainstream classes that they're still doing well. This is the same slide for English learners, except this is our scores in mathematics. And what you'll notice here on the far right is that rather than being below the state in ELA, we are now significantly higher than the county and the state. So much so that the West Ed has identified us among 6 districts. They were doing some research on districts that performance in mathematics for English learners, and identified 6 districts to go visit. So they came out and visited Roland a couple of months ago to do a study and a focus group with teachers. We went to 2 or 3 classrooms and schools to let them see the instruction. They interviewed principals, they interviewed teachers. And that report's not out yet, but they will be sort of highlighting Roland, because we do have significantly higher performance in math for our English learners than the rest of the state does. And they were also, just as a side note, that report on mathematics will come out soon, shortly. We don't think we have the date yet, but they were so impressed with what they were doing with newcomers at Nogales, that Patty Mendoza was working with them. You may have heard that Patty's doing the video welcoming in native languages, and they were so impressed with that, they've added that to a separate report for newcomers that's now published for the state. So really a lot of great work around ELs that's going on in Roland, and we can see it in the data. Students with disabilities. So a couple of notes about this. The students that are in this chart are not all of our students that are on IEPs. Some students that have IEPs take the SBAC, which is this test, and some students that have IEPs take the alternative assessment, which we do not have scores for yet. So the scores you see now are for students with IEPs, mild to moderate, that take the Smarter Balanced Assessment. And you can see that Roland is right on par with where the county and state average is, which is to be expected. It does look low because it is low, but these are students who have IEPs and are getting additional support for their educational plan. I do want to also mention that Scott Jensen and the assessment team, we've been working on, Scott's been working on developing a way to track the IEP goals and to have that as a counterpoint to this data. So the special ed team will have that as a baseline data point to share at the end of this year. And then in mathematics as well, we've got 10%, which is right on par with what the county and the state performed for students with disability. So foster youth, this is a new subgroup that the districts and schools are now monitoring, because they are part of the LCFF legislation requires the monitoring of foster youth. As you know, foster youth have very high mobility rates. They move around at an average of 2 to 3 times a year. Every time they change schools or districts, they lose about 3 months of educational attainment. They also have a much broader set of stakeholders that are helping them. So they have social workers, they have their ed rights holders. So it's a lot more communication and collaboration that needs to happen with the okay. And then also these students often are experiencing trauma because of the situation that put them into foster care. So for all those reasons, the research over the years has shown that they are one of the lowest performing subgroups of kids in standardized testing. In Roland, we have fluctuates between 80 to 120 foster youth at any given month. It changes every month. So this represents the students who might have been the month before. So it's for that reason they don't report foster youth at the district level. They report it at the county level, and we won't have the foster youth results for a few months because it takes them a while to get that data together. But in Roland, we had 44 that took the ELA test in May. And 11% of those students met or exceeded, which was a big drop from the 25% the year before. And then in mathematics, 14%, which was a drop from the year before, but maintained around our baseline year. And then the last 2 data slides before we go into next steps. This shows the achievement gap by ethnicity. So we have often shown the gap between ethnicities in Roland, so you can see that breakdown. But it's often helpful to also consider the impact of socioeconomic status on the achievement gap. And so when we take into account the economic status of students, what we would expect to see is that gap would either go away or would be narrowed. And so we do see from the left where it's just the full cohort of white, Hispanic, Filipino, Asian, and Black African American. And then when you control for economically disadvantaged, so on the right, these are white students who are also economically disadvantaged. You can see that the gap narrows a little bit. There's still a gap, but the gap does narrow a little bit. So the first, on the left-hand side, the gap between white and Hispanic Latino is 24 points. But then when you compare white economically disadvantaged students compared to Hispanic Latino disadvantaged students, that gap narrows down to 19. So the story is, yes, it does narrow a little bit. It does account for some of the difference, but there still is a gap. And so we are still continue to look at that gap, and we are committed to closing that gap among all of our subgroups, whether they are economically disadvantaged or not. So in math, you see the same pattern. So on the left, overall students, and then on the right, we control for economically disadvantaged students. So that gap does narrow a little bit, but there still is a gap. So we are aware of that and are digging into that gap as we go forward. So what now? So what are we doing now in response to this data? I pulled this quote from an article yesterday that was posted yesterday. I'll give you a second to read it. I won't read it to you. So the short story of this is that this is not a test that we can teach to, nor do we want to. The old test was really you could prep kids by having them come after school and teach them different strategies and tricks and how to, bubble in correctly and eliminate. This test really requires students to do deep thinking and have deep conceptual understanding, which requires a change in instruction. And so that really is the heart of the work that we're doing, and Roland and Dr. Mitchell has led us through and getting ready for, and we're going to transition now and talking about the next steps that gets to that change in instruction around these points.
Thank you. And so in terms of looking at the data and responding not only to the data, but responding to what we know and how students have the potential to learn best, we know that we need to fundamentally change the way that we're teaching our students and responding to the way that students learn. And so you'll recall back in in April, we began working with our principals, and the work began much earlier than that with our Ed Services team and Tricia Kalala and so forth, with the development of our Roland Unified School District Teaching and Learning Framework, which is there. You guys will recall that. And so the development of our framework and really focusing on the two areas within that framework for this school year, which is around the clarity of instructional purpose and successful learning by all students. And so we began working last year with our principals in April and worked very tirelessly with our principals in April, May, June, and July. And then in April, they led professional development with our teachers in August. And we have continued on that trend with this focus on clarity of instructional purpose and successful learning by all students, because we need our teachers to look at how they are teaching and how they can change the way that they're teaching to best meet student learning needs. We've also implemented, and our teachers are currently working through and examining our elements of lesson design. So as we talk about clarity of instructional purpose, why are you teaching what you're teaching? How are you teaching it? And what, in terms of content, are you teaching? And working with our teachers in all different grade levels, K-12 or TK-12, on this particular endeavor. The successful learning by all students is a piece that I have an expectation that our teachers and our principals know where our students are at the end of each day, the end of each week, the end of each month, the end of each semester or trimester, and at the end of the year, that we see growth for each and every student. And so how are we doing that? And we have some of our schools that are front runners in this work, where they are working with their teachers and looking at data and really seeing where is each and every student in their class and identifying each student and where they are in terms of meeting standards, and then looking at specific teaching strategies and methods in the classroom, particularly around small group instruction as well as other skills, to be able to move students forward so that every student has growth in their learning. At the elementary school level, predominantly, all of our schools have selected a focus area. So our schools have chosen a focus area around mathematical practices, literacy, defined as reading or writing workshop, as well as inquiry. And so we have 6 of our schools that have a focus on writing, 2 of our schools on reading, 3 of our schools on inquiry, and 3 of our schools in math. And so we've taken some additional professional development, and that was our focus on Friday with our elementary schools, was taking our framework for teaching and learning, looking at clarity of instructional purpose and successful learning by all students, dovetailing it with the elements of lesson design around the topic of mathematical practices, inquiry, or literacy. And so our teachers were very engaged in that professional learning at the elementary level, and at the secondary level, our secondary schools all met with their principals and continued the work on this same topic, and these same ideas, not using an academic focus, because the teachers are teaching within content areas, but continuing to look at our framework for teaching and learning and those 2 specific domains. We also are looking at
what are some of the specific next steps as well? We're supporting our teachers and we're supporting what they're doing in the classroom, and we're working with professional development, and we are seeing changes in how instruction is being delivered, but then also providing support for our students in other ways that are not necessarily traditional. And so things that we are exploring right now, we have a team that's working together for Saturday learning opportunities and opening up our schools for Saturday learning and focusing on students who have, depending on where they are in their achievement level, but also where they are in terms of attendance as well, because we know when students miss out on days of school, that they're missing out on learning opportunities. And so we are looking at offering this opportunity as early as possible. I know Mari and Trish and part of our Ed Services team have been working on the development of this so that we can implement Saturday learning. We have to have a better name. I forbid Saturday school. And so we've dubbed it as Saturday learning for the moment, but we will come up with something even better. And not drill and kill, a very different approach. So where students are engaged in learning activities that require them to think, process, talk, act, prepare, and so not the breakfast club that you might remember in terms of Saturday school, but something that is much more innovative. And so we have a team working through that. Also looking at winter break, research tells us that when students are out of school for an extended period of time, they experience learning loss. We have a 3-week winter recess, and so we are exploring the ability to offer a winter school learning that would allow our students to engage in learning during the 3-week winter break as well. Looking at that, even looking to see if there's the option or interest of our parents. Our parents have expressed some interest for some time during that winter break. We're now exploring if there would be an interest during spring break, because it is only 1 week, but if our students might be interested in pursuing some things, even some opportunities from some educational field trips for them to learn from. And then lastly, our summer program. So we have always offered a traditional summer program. An elementary summer program is unique. Many school districts do not offer summer school for elementary students, which we have done, and we have continued to expand it. The expectation as we look for next year is also expanding that opportunity for a greater number of weeks. So again, there's that learning loss piece, and we have had our summer learning programs right at the very beginning of summer, and so staff has been challenged with to look at bringing those opportunities to our students both at the beginning and at the end of summer, and being able to spread that out a little bit to meet the needs of our students and student learning. And so it looks like a year-round learning program, and that is what it looks like, because that is what it is. And again, not having it look much different than what Saturday schools or summer schools and so forth people might traditionally think of. We have great success. Sylvia Rivas and her team put together Saturday learning opportunities, which our students and families clamor for. And so we're looking to replicate some of those opportunities for a broader number of students. Then also looking at that focus on small group instruction to address the needs of all students. When you're teaching to an entire group of students, then it's difficult to know and to be able to really tailor your instruction when you have the knowledge of where every student is and you expect that growth at the end of that day. How are you going to tailor that instruction to make sure that every student has that growth opportunity at the end of every day? And one of the best ways of doing that is through small group instruction. And in our professional development with our teachers, we are working with them on developing those skills of breaking down whole group instruction into small group instruction. Also having instructional coaches at every single school now and deployed out to the schools. Our coaches are a huge part of helping make all of this happen as well. So our coaches are there as a colleague and a guide on the side, coaching and working and assisting teachers as they transition and change the way that they teach to best serve our students. And then also looking at the continued use of data at all levels throughout the year. And that's that expectation again, that every student has growth. And that we are adjusting our instruction on a regular basis and not just sailing right through curriculum and hoping for best. Because hope is not a strategy, and so we need to address the learning needs of our students. So we have the framework, which I've already addressed. Here it just happens to be our elements of lesson design. And here you'll see samples. This happens to be pictures, and actually these are tweets from social media of some of the professional learning that took place on the last Friday. So it's always interesting, you know, our students are not home and sometimes are not in school, and sometimes our parents are thinking, well, what goes on? You know, when no kids are at school, what are those teachers? What's that school district doing? And we were extremely busy, hopping to 10 different locations, going with professional learning from our teachers, and our teachers were highly engaged with the work that was taking place. And our survey data from our teachers at the end of that day provided us with tremendous feedback and great accolades for their opportunity to learn together with their colleagues. We also, again, as we mentioned here, the opportunities for our students to learn and providing specialized programs or services of support for student learning outside of the traditional school day, as well as the interior of the day. Also looking at the Family Resource Center and the work that Laurel Estrada does through the Family Resource Center, really focusing how we support our foster youth. Sometimes our foster youth are with us for a very, very limited period of time, but while they're here, they're 100% ours, and we need to do everything we can to shore up any shortcomings they have academically and prepare them for their future. And then here again, that piece of data. And so teachers working together and looking at student data and how can they adjust their instruction to make sure that our students are learning and achieving each and every day. So we'll turn it over to you for questions.
Ms. Pride, do you want to start?
Sure, thank you. Is this on?
Yes.
Oh, okay. First of all, thank you. This is my favorite presentation of the year because I love data. Well, this kind of data. I like this. So thank you. Very well put together. Just a couple of questions. When we were talking about the, let me see which part I'm on here. The 2-year change in percentage of students meeting and exceeding standards in ELA, you indicated that 5th grade is the most challenging. Why is that?
So across the state, teachers report that there's a jump in expectation of conceptual understanding, and what they're expected to do from, it used to be grade 6 was that jump, but that's been pushed down now a year because the level of expectation has been, what used to be expected in grade 6 is now grade 5. What used to be expected in grade 1 is now kindergarten, and so it's that idea of when's that big jump, and it's now grade 5.
So the curriculum has shifted within the state. For middle schools are 6, 7, and 8. So we have 7 and 8, but 5th grade is the last grade of elementary education, and so it's the last year in terms of preparing students for that secondary experience. And so when you look at the content that the students are learning from their history, social science content, as well as here, it has a rigorous jump from 4th grade to 5th grade.
And then I noticed that in the information provided that for 5th grade they went down in English, but they went up in math. How do we account for that? I mean, is there anything that you're looking at right now of why you think that happened?
So we have talked a lot about that. Part of what we infer about the math scores is that there's been a consistent focused curriculum in math for 3 years. So this past year was their 3rd year to have a system-wide curriculum. They also had they all had training in the Common Core standards and the standards for mathematical practices 2 or 3 years ago. Whereas in ELA, they've done a lot of shifting around the curriculum, and so there was a more consistent curriculum in place.
There's been a very consistent focus in mathematics at the elementary level, where it has not necessarily been there at the secondary level. And so the secondary math program and what we offer at the secondary level in terms of how we teach and how we accelerate students and support students who are accelerated is our next area to really examine. because we can see that we need to do much greater research in terms of the data for students mathematically when they're accelerated, what happens, because they don't take another test until 11th grade, and have our students still engaged in math classes and so forth.
Then my next question was, you had on the percentage of students in grades 3 to 8 and 11 that met or exceeded standards in mathematics by grade level. And I think you kind of answered my question when we were talking about how the 11th grade went down. And so the assessment is integrated math.
Yes, it's algebra, algebra 1, geometry, and algebra 2 combined.
That explains it to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Everything was great. Thank you. Let's see. Do we have any results on the students that did not meet the standard and then went up to nearly making the standard, the bottom two? Do they ever give us that kind of information?
So do you mean the percentage of students that were the bottom two?
So let's say the year before they were at standard not met, the lowest, and then they moved up to standard nearly met, but they're not in any of these statistics.
They're not here, but we do have that data, and we have been looking at that data of students that, and vice versa, students that were here and went down, or students that were started in 1 and went up to 3.
Okay, because to me that's very successful, even though we can't see it. It's very good that these kids moved up. Okay, and then grade 11 for English language arts, they were at 64, but math 34. 30 is a big difference. Can you explain what happens in 11th grade in math compared to the English language arts? Like,
Totally different content.
I cannot believe that it could be such a big gap.
Yeah.
Why
Just the math.
the math?
Yeah,
So that was all trade.
so the math test includes all the way up to algebra 2 content. So, and there's some students that are not reaching that level. And then some students, as Dr. Mitchell alluded to, are taking mathematics early on, and then they're not taking a math class in grade 11. So there are just different factors that we're going to dig into in the next, now, and start to unpack what's going on there.
So we have a practice mathematically that our students are able to accelerate, and there are some students that absolutely should accelerate in mathematics. But you have some students that triple accelerate, so they're potentially taking Algebra 2 as an 8th grader, where Algebra 2 is an 11th grade course, and then do not continue to take mathematics and tap her out. They don't take math any longer. They feel that they don't go into calculus and so forth. And depending on what their learning experience is, if they're doing it by rote memorization rather than truly understanding concepts, we won't be able to retain that to pull it back out in 11th grade. And so then you have some students that have far exceeded and have moved on, and others that haven't gotten yet to Algebra 2 and will be taking it as a senior. So there's all sorts of factors mixed into math from, we have students that accelerate and continue on and are well, in Calc PC at that time, others that haven't reached that, and others that have reached it much earlier and haven't continued their math practice. So that's the research we need to do, is really figure out how our math program supports student learning long-term, not short-term.
Well, doesn't the test also, like when Angie was asking about 5th grade, it also takes the 4th grade standards that they taught, incorporated into the Common Core test too? So that's what, it's a combination of all the grades going up, of everything they've learned.
Let me make sure I understand the question. So each grade level test only assesses grade level standards.
Right.
So the 5th grade test will only assess grade level content standards.
So it's not going to include any 4th grade that they learned.
It does not include 4th grade, no.
And does 5th grade have more standards than the other grade levels?
Same amount of standards, yeah.
Okay. I wanted to say something about the English language arts, the percentage of students in grades 3 through 8, the one that for the U.S. more than 12 months. That was very nice how you explained that, because the 9 didn't look good, but as you explained, how the kids are reclassified, that helped a lot to know that I think they were better than the other, so that was going really good. 90% reclassifying is amazing. That is like, wow, a lot of hard work. What else? And then I wanted to ask, do we have something by the schools also to show how they did? But you did one.
We do.
No, I mean, we have 19 schools, so yes, we are analyzing school data, we're analyzing grade level data, individual teacher data, individual student data, so we can go to the granular level. This is the broad district level, because we're focusing on an entire district. But yes, we have site, I mean, we can take it down to by student, and then all the way up to the district and everything in between. So yes, we have site data, not disaggregated to this extent yet, because again, this was just released yesterday. And so we don't have it all disaggregated. Brian and I have spent some time looking through all of it and looking at individual school data, but not to this granular level.
And my last question is, I really love how you did everything. I mean, it looks very positive and everything, but we're basing it on the 2 years ago rather than last year. And so I was wondering why we're not looking at last year to this year. Even though we may have some negative numbers, the kids still are very close. I was just wondering why we're not seeing it from the year.
So I do not mean to communicate that year over year is not important to look at. We are looking at both compared to last year. We're just trying to put it in context of the big picture of 2 years as well, and not lose sight of the forest for the trees, so to speak. But yeah, it's a good point. We are looking at both last year to this year and also baseline to this year.
And everything looked really good, honestly. Even when you said one grade did bad, but they did good, if you compared it to the other year before. So it wasn't. Thank you. It was a great presentation.
Mr. Chen?
I want to learn more about the achievement level. There are 4 levels: the standard math, nearly math, and standard math, and exceed. My first question is, are these all evenly divided level, or how do you construct this?
So each grade level has different scale score cut points. So when a student takes a 5th grade test, they get a 4-digit scale score, 2,342. That number falls on a scale somewhere for each grade level. So for grade 5, level 1, 2, 3, 4 will have a range of scale scores for each level, and then for 6th grade it will be a different range of scale scores.
Where can I learn more about this? Is that on the public website? You can see it in the Department of Education.
And I can provide it to. I can give a brief write-up on it.
We can get you more
Yeah,
information
so
on the
there's more
website.
how-
Because every grade level is different.
Right.
And those cut scores are different for each of them, where they determine where they are.
And
And it
when-
is on the website.
Okay, so my next question is, do you analyze the score according to this? Because the data we see today is only above or below, pass or not,
Right.
above standard or below standard.
Right.
Do we have number for the number of students who had the exceed and the number of the standard math or the individual all the 4 levels?
Yes,
So you analyze it?
yes. So the data we've been looking at does break it down by each performance level, and so what we're looking at closely is like that movement that Donna mentioned was moving from level 1 to 2, and which students move from 2 to 3, and because that gives important information about Dr. Mitchell talking about small groups. So we have a lot of students that stay in that level 1 and don't move up to 2. We need to make sure that instruction is giving students opportunity to relearn or be retaught something that they didn't
Are
get.
those numbers available?
They are available, yes. Yeah. The way it's reported on the state website is by the 4 levels.
Well, and we do look at, and we're having conversations with teachers, and teachers looking at the individual students in their classrooms. As we continue our work together, and as we're preparing for the next principals meeting that we have on October 4th, the conversation that every teacher, the expectation that teachers know where all of the students in their classroom are in that, on that scale. So it's not just whether you met or exceeded or not in terms of 2, but where are they on that scale of 4? Because it really does change how you design your lessons and how you work with students in small groups to move students forward for that growth.
Okay, thank you.
Can you talk to us a little bit about the 2 slides that mention quote-unquote claims? How are those different than just the raw scores?
So so what we were looking at earlier was the 4 levels, the overall. So it takes all of those together and gives an overall score. So when we're looking at this data, for example, this is everything, it's all the claims together, reading, writing, listening, and research and inquiry all together. What the claim scores do is they pull out the items that are reading and they put them in one score. They pull out all the writing items, they pull out all the listening items, and they give separate scores for each of those different areas.
I think it's important too when you're looking at when you're looking at claim scores, the data is presented in those students that are near or above. The other scores are those that have met or exceeded. So it's broken down differently. It's presented differently.
That's why these scores all look higher.
Higher, that's
Because
right.
these are the students that are near or above standard.
So overall has 4 levels,
Yeah.
and the claims, this is getting really, but the claims only have 3 levels.
Yeah.
So below, near, or above.
Okay, when you take the slides, it could be English, ELA, the ones that show that the first year we were lower, we took a good jump the second year, but then we came down a little this year. If I can ask this in a coherent way. What happened between the first and second year where the jump was? How was that different between the second and third? You know, how do we account for that?
So we are still unpacking that for ourselves, but what seems to be the case, people that are reporting statewide and across the 12 states that have taken it, is that across all states there was a big jump that first year. So often what happens is after the first year of taking a test, people weren't familiar with it, and the second year, that bump, people are more familiar with the test or familiar with the format, so there is typically a bump that second year. So that's part of what explains it, is just it was a new test the first year, and then there was some familiarity with it the second year.
Because I was led to believe that first year test would be low. And we would expect it to be low for a few years. Then we will see a jump. And this is a little different than what I expected it to look like. Okay, now, do we get numbers, or do the state education website, does it have a comparison of school districts to numbers of foster kids, numbers of ELAs, that type of information? Is there any comparative data?
Comparative data across districts?
Yeah.
Yes.
To dive pretty deep to do it, and that's one of the challenges that I've asked Brian to do, is to look at our neighboring districts and look at our comparative districts and so forth to see the number of foster youth, which is that was the most challenging because it's a low number, but the percentage of free and reduced lunch, the percentage of EL students, etc., and then looking to see where we have trends and where we compare to similar districts.
And Dr. Mitchell, I think you said that starting in about April, you started looking more deeply into following each student every day to see some growth throughout the year.
That didn't start in April. The work around our framework started in April, Actually, the full introduction of the successful learning by all students that is going to launch October 4th with our principals. So there are some schools that are doing it already that, you know, and some that started it last year and worked through last year. And those are some schools where we did see an increased growth. And so, but it's a part of the whole learning package for teachers this year.
I think it's a good idea because you group, take the whole school, all the fifth graders and, you know, all the different schools and get that score. But we've got to get down to each student. Each student needs to be growing. And I think we'll hopefully see some gains.
Sorry.
Yeah. So let me ask a question about the first year and second jump. I think I've got the same feeling. Yeah, I understand when 2 years ago we were told, because not familiar with the test, then the score may be low. So, but the second year, yeah, we do have a jump, but not that big. We jump. But the third year, if we don't jump, maybe some will drop. And is it still not familiar, because not familiar with the test? How long are we expecting? If they keep continue the score like this, only 50% meet standard, then I think the whole thing is failed. The half of the kids don't get it. Only 50% or even 43% kids meet standard. So I'm expecting to see 80%, 90% meet standard.
I think you have to also recognize that this is one snapshot in time. It's one measurement of a student learning. So it's not a holistic approach. It's one particular day. So if poor Frank Chang was taking his test today feeling under the weather, he's not going to perform very well. Sorry, I know you're not feeling good. And my voice being all froggy and so forth. So it is a snapshot in time. So we need to look at multiple measures to learning. This clearly is one measure. It's a very public measure, and it is something we pay very close attention to, but we also tie in other pieces as well. And so when you're looking at our data is on trend with what's happening across the state, what's happening in the county is also happening here locally. So we're not
talking about only our school. I'm talking overall the other.
No, I understand.
Whole county,
state.
whole state are only 15%, 45%.
Right. I think that's the questions, that's what the newspaper is
Yeah,
talking
yeah,
about as well. But I think when you look at it, I mean, that's, in some ways, that's what it's been set up to be. Go back through any standardized testing that we've had ever in the history of education, going all the way back to CBEST scores, which that takes us back a while. Again, it's one snapshot. It's one measurement, one snapshot, one content area. So I wouldn't say that only 50% of our students in the state of California are, you know, are smart or whatever word you want to apply to it, because again, that's one snapshot. It's important. It needs to be paid attention to. We're doing a lot of things to address, but you're not going to. It'd be pretty rare across the state if you're seeing 80s and 90s.
Should we go around again? Ms. Pride, do you have anything more to add to your question?
No, just that I think I think that individuals need to recognize that multiple measures is the big thing now. Even the community colleges are going to multiple measures because they recognize that we can't just look at data like this and say, oh yeah, that's the you know, what defines the student. It's not. So we have to keep our minds open as we look at this and look at the big picture, as Dr. Huff and Dr. Mitchell said.
They shouldn't have changed it. We would be at 50%. I'd look at it like that. Why didn't they wait till next year? Come on. But the math, I was really happy that you showed the claims, because to me, I thought number sense, the concepts and procedures would be the easiest. And in my surprise, that was the lowest, whereas our kids did better in problem solving and modeling and communicating, reasoning. So they have those reading skills to be able to do that in math, but yet the other one. So I found that very interesting, that's all.
Chen and North?
Even as the one snapshot, I still
want to see next year we can get the installed score increase, get a higher score. Okay.
That'd be everybody's goal.
Yeah.
I'm-
That's the-
I have one more question about your astronomy chart.
Oh, yeah, a new name for it.
What it kind of looks like astronomy chart. You said each principal chose their area that they wanted to
We
concentrate
gotta
on.
get to the astronomy chart. I gotta see what it looks like. I know, we're looking at it that way. All right. Okay, got it.
I think what you told us was that each principal took this to their school and decided on what area they wanted to concentrate on in their school. Was that correct?
So we, as a district, through working with our principals, April, May, June, and July, really analyzed this. It started out blank, and we began looking at, how do you define clarity of instructional purpose? How do you define the different pieces of the 6 clusters that are there? And then what does it look like in a classroom, and what would be evidence of that? So and then as the group, our principals together collaboratively, we selected the 2 areas as a district we're going to focus our energies on out of the 6, which is clarity of instructional purpose and successful learning by all students. So 2 of those cluster areas in the focus. Then from there, we talked about focus areas from literacy, mathematical practices, or inquiry, and we brainstormed several of them, narrowed it to those 3, and then principals did work with their school site staff around where do they see the best application for their particular school. And so when you're focusing on literacy, you're looking at it through clarity of instructional purpose and successful learning by all students, and the evidence of that would look a certain way in a classroom. And so it creates the common language across our district, K-12. And our secondary schools have not been focusing so much on the literacy, mathematical practice, or inquiry, because they're already content specific, but they are absolutely looking at clarity of instructional purpose and successful learning by all students. So this is a K-12 document that we are working through. This is our framework for teaching and learning.
Do you foresee that teachers will eventually get to choose their own for their class because they know where their kids are performing and where they really, for their class, should be concentrating? It may not be the same as the whole school.
Well, you don't get to forget about anything. So even though the school has a focus, because it was a way of which to create some opportunities for professional learning across the district as well. And so we have, as a district, have a very rich history of providing very high levels of professional development. But it has also been in a potpourri kind of a style, and each one picks what fits their needs best. And so there hasn't been consistency across our district K-12. So what if a first grader starts in Brian's classroom and it focuses one area, and then they come to me for 2nd grade and you for 3rd grade, they're getting a nice mix of potpourri, but no consistency around even academic language that we may use in our classrooms. And so this is kind of an anchor opportunity for us to focus our professional development. But if a school has selected mathematical practices, that means that there's some intense professional development for those schools around mathematical practices, but it does not by any means give them the opportunity to forget about reading workshop or literacy or inquiry and so forth. So everyone is still teaching all of the content areas, but it was a way in which to focus and create PLCs as well amongst our principals and our schools to cross-pollinate across schools.
Do you find that some kids just don't test well, and teachers are very surprised that their scores are low because it doesn't really show what they know?
Correct, absolutely. And the other piece that we talked about when this when the new testing first came out was it's all done online. So we're not bubbling answers, as Brian said. We're not using number 2 pencils any longer. Everything is done using a computer. So there was a concern on whether or not our students the mastery of content would get lost in lack of to be able to apply using a technology tool. And so we've been addressing those pieces as well. But yeah, absolutely, there will be a teacher that, or a student is able to have a conversation with a teacher or in another way show that they have mastery of the concept, but it doesn't come out on the test. And that happens on a standardized test of this magnitude, but it also happens on a chapter test, you know, when you're going through, you know, math in chapter 1. And it doesn't come out the way that we thought that student would.
When you think you killed a test and you come out
Yeah.
at a bad grade, that's not good, huh?
Right. Yeah.
As far as the test too, these kind of questions are so difficult that they ask 2 questions, and as you watch a student do it, they might answer the first part of it, but not the second. So now they got, you know, dinged for it, unfortunately. It's totally different than it's ever been before, so it's difficult for the kids too.
Thank you. Any more questions, board? We thank you very much for the presentation. It was a real eye-opener, and we look forward to hearing throughout the year how we're doing and how your evaluation and delving into the subject is going. So thank you.
It's an exciting time, and it's a large team effort, and our principals are really, have stepped up to the challenge to do the work, the important work on behalf of our students. So they, along with the teachers and our classified staff, are supporting this effort, because this conversation is taking place with all of our employees, not just principals, not just teachers, but our classified employees as well.
Okay, that finishes our our learning lesson.
Yep. You're excused. I'm going to give you a test first.
Oh, no. Now there's no closed session tonight.
Nothing.
So I would like to have a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Meeting adjourned at 6 p.m. sharp.
Right.
6 p.m.